Hello, everyone. Here we are. We're going to continue the book of Esther. We're going to start with chapter 3, and let's recap what we went through. Queen Vashti was asked to come in wearing nothing except her crown in front of a drunken party that her husband, the king, Xerxes, Xerxes, was throwing for his friends, and she refused to do it. So they deposed her, and they looked amongst all of the virgins in the land, prepared them, sent them into the king, and a young girl named Esther was chosen. Now, Esther was a Jew who'd been raised by her cousin Mordecai when her parents had died, okay? And she was used to obeying Mordecai. She was a good child. Now, as a young woman, she was chosen in this virgin hunt to be the queen. So while she was in the palace, Mordecai was in the gates because they had been taken out of Jerusalem during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. They had been captured, and they have not gone back to Jerusalem. They're still living in Persia. So she has now been made the queen, and her uncle or her cousin Mordecai, I think it was her uncle, I'm not sure, he was in the gate of the city, and he overheard two of the king's men plotting to kill the king. So he immediately went to the queen, Esther, and told her, and she told the king, and these two men were impaled on poles for doing this. And Mordecai was written down in the annals as having done this for the king, of being the person who had overheard the plot. Now, meanwhile, Esther, whose Jewish name was Hadassah, she had not told the king that she was a Jewess, okay? So her heritage, her nationality was hidden. Okay, so let's pick it up from there. After these events, meaning the two traitors who went after the king were put to death, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, and Haman is spelled Haman. For the king had commanded this concerning him, but Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. Okay, so he revealed himself here, okay, and told them he was a Jew, and this is most likely why he wouldn't kneel down in a form of worship to Haman. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, the Jews, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. That would mean the whole kingdom of Persia. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, Nisan, the P-U-R, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar, A-D-A-R. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There's a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they don't obey the king's laws. It's not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I'll give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." So he's saying, you know, I'll give you a big reward, king. You know, I'll politically contribute to you if you will put a decree out to destroy the Jews. Okay, but he hasn't said that they're Jews. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, S-A-T-R-A-P-S, these are leaders, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring, because he had given his signet ring to Haman so he could write these letters. And do you remember that letters, threatening letters or evil letters, are the devil, okay? Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so they would be ready for that day. So you see, Hitler wasn't the first person to go after the Jews. The devil's been going after them as a sacred, separated people anytime he can, okay? Starting with Nebuchadnezzar, taking them away into the bondage of Babylon. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Now remember, the king doesn't realize he's married to a Jew, Esther. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. They didn't understand what the heck was going on or why. All right, so let me tell you one thing that I realized. Do you remember in the last chapter of Nehemiah, it said that Eliashib had rented out a room around the temple, it was a temple storehouse, to Tobiah. Well, why was Nehemiah so angry that it was Tobiah? Because Sanballat was partnered with Tobiah, and they were the two that wrote the evil letters. So when Nehemiah went back to the king to serve the king, who was Artaxerxes at the time, and then came back to Jerusalem when he was released from that service, he found that Eliashib had rented out or created this room for Tobiah. And so that's why he went in and took all of Tobiah's things and threw them out, and then, you know, lit the incense, put all the things back in the room that were supposed to be in there, and cleansed it, and was so furious because this was a distinct enemy of God, okay? So I just wanted to backtrack and fill that in because it dawned on me, Tobiah, and then I went, oh, because I was thinking it was Sanballat and Tobias. It wasn't, it was Sanballat and Tobiah. So I am probably, rightfully so, since they didn't explain it, who this particular Tobiah was, then I'm assuming, probably rightfully so, that it was the Tobiah, as the years had passed, after the wall was rebuilt, that was such an enemy of God with Sanballat, okay? Because we know that Sanballat was involved because somebody had married into his family. So those two were still around, okay? But Nehemiah took care of him and threw his butt out of those rooms that were part of the temple complex, okay? It was a storeroom for the precious things of the temple, okay? So, all right, so the city of Susa is bewildered. They don't know what the heck is going on or why a particular people are supposed to be eradicated on this particular day of the year, and they had to be prepared for it. All right. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs, now the eunuchs are men who have been castrated. They are able to be amongst the harem women and be servants to the queen, because there's no risk of them being able to impregnate any of the women or the queen, of course, okay? When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, Hathak, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So she obviously had no idea what this edict was that had gone out, or that it was going to affect her people. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. So he'd been tipped off. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa. Susa is spelled S-U-S-A, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives." So you never go into the inner court of the king. If you do, and he reaches the golden scepter out to you, then you've been accepted. But if not, you're put to death right away. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. All right, then she instructed him to say to all the king's official, I'm trying to put this in context. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai. Okay, so she has sent Hathach back to Mordecai to say to him, look, anybody that goes into the king in the inner court is going to get put to death unless he accepts the scepter. And I haven't seen the guy. I haven't seen my husband for 30 days, okay? It's been 30 days since I was called to go to my husband. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. That's a very famous scripture, and we quote stuff like that often when the situation fits. We say, who knows, maybe you've been put there for such a time as this. Okay, she's a great example of, I want to say, the provenance of that statement. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I'll go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. That, there was a time where I have a bracelet here that I've been wearing for 30 years, and it's a little tiny, what do you call them? ID bracelets. And I got it at a jewelry, or I was selling coins for an investor who also had a section of very nice jewelry in his shop. I don't know how to explain it, but I purchased it from him like probably over 30 years ago, and I put my name on it. I had my name engraved on it, and on the flip side, I was going to put, if I die, I die, because I was so impressed with this story, and I just haven't gotten to it. All right. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. Can you imagine how terrifying this would be? The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Now remember, Haman doesn't know that she's a Jew. Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits because he thinks he's in favor. He knows he's in favor with the king. He has no idea what Esther's going to do. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. Can't you just see this? "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she's invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up reaching to a height of 50 cubits and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered in the book of the Chronicles the record of his reign to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. See how the Lord's working everything out? "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing's been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" So Haman's going to think it's about him. Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse and do just as you've suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Don't neglect anything you've recommended." So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the streets. He had to do it himself. City streets proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." The Lord is in this, people. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you can't stand against him. You'll surely come to ruin." So what a nice wife he's got, right? I mean, she's just like a total witch. She suggests the pole that Mordecai should be impaled on, and then when he's down, she kicks him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. Okay. Let's see, where are we at? Okay, I'm going to leave it there, all right? Don't go ahead of me. I'm going to leave it right there, and tomorrow night we'll see what happens at this banquet, okay? I love you very much. You have a wonderful evening. We'll pick it up with Esther. It looks like Esther chapter, why am I not seeing this all of a sudden? Chapter 7. We're going to pick it up there. I love you. Bye-bye.